So on the marketing front, I also wanted to present some of the cool stuff that we learned and the cool stuff that we actually do and have had success building. So one of the biggest things that we found was that, particularly in the transition from consulting to software, is that selling is incredibly painful, right? Building up like a sales team is super challenging. Salespeople often don't mesh well with engineers, code folks, and even many entrepreneurs. And so that culture, I think, is a dangerous thing that we have had to watch out for. And essentially, we biased against it entirely. We have 0 people who do sales at SEO Moz. I had a funny phone call the other day. It was MTV Networks, which is, runs like Comedy Central and MTV and VH1. And I think they actually have some media presence here in Italy as well. And so they wanted to know, well, can you have an account manager call us up, and walk us through SEO Moz? We don't have any account managers. Oh, well, maybe do you have a sales office in New York? No, we don't have any sales people. Oh, well, how can we find out what your software does? You can try it. You just go online and you click and then enter your email and you can try it right there. And so that process for us, that's worked really, really well. I actually wrote a blog post about this, about how don't sell, have people come to you, and how I didn't do that when I tried to raise venture capital the second time. I can talk about that a little bit more if you guys are interested. I don't know if the VC raising stuff is super interesting, but in 2009 I did try to raise a second round of capital for SEO Moz, despite the fact that we were profitable, and failed at that spectacularly. So I'm happy to talk about that excellent time. With SEO Moz, we found that by educating people, by teaching them to fish, by teaching them how they could do SEO, how they could do all the kinds of things that I'm talking to you about today, we could build up a great community. And this is what drives the tens of thousands of people who subscribe to the SEO Moz blog, who follow us on Twitter, who participate with us on Facebook, who come to the site every day. I think February was our first ever million visit month. So it's built up this massive community, and certainly we don't have 1 million subscribers, but that community means that we don't have to sell, right? Because people can come, and if we can convince 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20 of them that our software is interesting, they're going to buy. So some forms of content that worked for us to build that educational stuff. The blog, which we update every day. By the way, updating a blog every day, particularly when there's only one of you writing, which for the first 4 years of SEO Moz, I was the only person who was writing on the blog. Geraldine can attest, right? It would be 1 a.m., we'd get home from some work event, some dinner or something. She'd be like, come to bed. No, I can't. I need to, every night I have to crank out something. And I have this personal feeling of guilt if I don't put something good on the blog. So I never felt good phoning it in. I had to put a lot of effort in, which means tons of nights that you're up until 3 a.m. and but that's just the way it is. And it's weird too, because after doing that for a year, you'd think, okay, well, now you're successful. No, even after 2 or 3 or 4, you can tell I'm an obstinate kind of person, right? That despite all this debt, I didn't give up. That despite the fact that I blogged for 4 years and it still wasn't, doing all that much, I kept going. And now it's really grown into something. So here we go. We do a lot of viral targeted content, essentially saying, hey, we wish that there was a one of these for our industry, right? We wish that, I was talking to Robin outside about a company called Oyster, which is a startup in New York that does hotel reviews. And one of the things that they always wished is that TripAdvisor and all these other little review sites weren't the only places to go for information, because they didn't really like user reviews. What they wanted was a paid journalist who would go stay at the hotel and take real photos and really review the place. And so that's what they built. It was kind of, they call it photo fake-outs, where they'll show the hotel's photos side by side with the ones from their journalists. And it's fascinating. It's great content. So we wrote that Beginner's Guide to SEO that I talked about. We do industry surveys. I do a lot of graphics and illustration. This is from my background in Flash, but The thing about this stuff that's great is that tons of other people will pick these up. They'll put them in their presentations. They'll put them on their websites. And then they'll link back to us, right? And they'll share the fact that this came from SEO Moz. And so that citation, that link, passes SEO value, passes visitors, means good branding for us. If we're the source where everyone goes to essentially talk about SEO, this is a huge win for us. We do a weekly video series that I actually, what's weird about it is if you go to a normal blog post on SEO Moz, it's usually, you look at our analytics, it's usually read by between 8,000 and 12,000 people, sometimes many more, sometimes 20 or 30,000 people. We've never had a video, I think, that's been watched by more than 12,000 people. So you might think, oh, wouldn't you give up on that content format since it doesn't get you in as many views and visitors? But the fact is that the engagement on a video is phenomenal, and the quality of branding, right? The number of people who know me because they've read a blog post or know SEO Moz because they've read a blog post is small in comparison to the number of people who know us because they've seen the video. And the only way you can feel that is to kind of get out of the building and talk to people, right? Go to a lot of conferences and events and forums where you can speak to people in person, and then you feel that impact that video has. It's been pretty phenomenal. By the way, we recently switched our hosting provider for video to a company called Wistia. If you're doing online video, I think they're phenomenal. They like do all the good SEO, XML video sitemaps and all that kind of stuff for you. It's Wistia. And there's a really good one here in Italy that does almost the same thing called ShinyStat. It's also a really good one. And they're a pretty exciting startup actually too. So we also do a lot of research and data sharing. So essentially, when we have questions that we wish we knew, or when we have questions that we think the rest of the internet world would like to know, we'll spend money and time and resources doing that research and then sharing it, which is sort of weird. It goes against a lot of long-term business practices which say, oh, if you spent money on research, you should use that as a competitive advantage. And our competitive advantage is to share it and to be the resource that everyone else uses to refer to that stuff. So this, for example, we compared how Bing and Google's rankings are different and sort of the different elements that correlate well with ranking at those two engines, and shared this publicly on the blog, and actually had a lot of feedback from people inside Google, people inside Microsoft, who commented about this and didn't like the fact that, oh, wait a minute, we should be, we shouldn't be ranking stuff this way. We think this was wrong, or that was wrong, those kinds of things. If anyone here uses a service like Compete.com or Alexa, Quantcast to try and figure out how many visits other sites have, right, competitive data around how many visits other sites have, let me assure you that data is terrible. Absolutely horrible. So we did a bunch of work around this, and we're actually in the process of redoing some, and the preliminary results still look horrible. Alexa, Compete, Quantcast, Google Trends for websites, whoever you want, any of those competitive intelligence sources, compared to the actual visitor data, it's just awful. Like, worse than a 0.5 correlation, which would be the minimum acceptable in my view. So if you are going to compete and you're like, oh, this guy has more traffic than me, that is a random guess. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. It's not good. But by sharing this information, right, we have lots of people who refer back to it whenever somebody cites Compete scores or Podcast scores or Alexa data, and that's great for us because it sort of shows that we're thinking about the industry and trying to stay a step ahead. So we do a lot of slide presentations. The interesting thing about these is I'll speak to small audiences and I'll prepare a slideshow, and then I'll sort of think, well, that was kind of frustrating. I gave a talk in, gosh, where was that? I gave a talk to a small number of people in Portland, Oregon. Maybe there's a couple hundred people in the room. It was an SEO presentation. I sort of thought, man, it sucks that only that many people got it. But then I'll put it online, and I'll tell people that it's online. Those people will tweet it, they'll share it, they'll email it to other people. It'll get thousands of views on a SlideShare. Since SlideShare and Scribd and a few of these other ones, they often take any resource that gets popular on their site and feature it on the home page. So this means that I'll get 10,000 people looking at a presentation that I made from a seed of just a few hundred. And that's a really powerful driver. It's one of the big reasons that I'm a big believer in creating new presentations virtually every time I talk. We also give webinars on our website. I would say we've had good success with them, but we haven't found them to be a great customer acquisition channel. They're a great retention channel for us. But that said, the business I was speaking about earlier, HubSpot, their primary customer acquisition channel is webinars. They essentially give a webinar on a topic like social media marketing or the science of tweets and retweets, like how to get more followers on Twitter, how to get more people retweeting you. And they'll have 5,000 or 10,000 people go to attend one of those webinars online around the country and then sign up for their services afterwards. So they love it.